Hello everyone. So in this video we are going to learn how to use grid layout to change the layout of web page elements. So in the flex layout concept we learned how to use flex layout property to customize the web page elements as a row or as a column. But by using grid layout you can just do it together because grid is a two-dimensional element. So where flex is the one-dimensional, either you can control row or column, but using grid you can just control. You can see here in this picture like this, the whole element. It could be like either you can control this row or particular column. That is flex layout concept. But in grid layout concept you can control multiple rows and columns together. So that is grid layout. So to include grid layout property in our CSS, you have to use the property named display, and the value of the display property is grid. So for flex layout, we have to use the same property display, and the value is flex. The same thing here, we have to use grid as a property value. So grid also have two components like grid parent and grid item. So all the container, grid parent container have the direct children like that. The elements that belongs to that grid container is called grid items. So we are going to see like how we can customize the elements by controlling the grid items property and also grid container property. So first let's see what are the terms, that basic terms that that involves with the grid layout. So first, grid line. So what is grid line? You can see here the lines that separates the rows and column is called grid lines. Okay, for example, if we take the column, the grid line starts here. Okay, so where the first column starts, and this is line 2 and this is line 3 and line 4. So for 3 column layout there will be 4 lines. Similarly for the rows, it starts where the row starts. So for the 2 row layout there will be 3 lines, row lines. Okay, so that is called grid line. So we will be using this grid line to control the placement of the items. So the next one, grid row. So which is pretty obvious. So in the given picture there are 2 rows, 2 grid rows. Okay, and then grid column, which is also direct, meaning so in this picture we have 3 grid columns, 1 2 3, and then grid track. So grid track is the generic term, that is the space between that depicts both grid column and grid row. Okay, for example, if you take the column, the space between line 1 and line 2 is called first grid column. Similarly, the space between the grid row line 1 and row line 2 is called first grid row. Okay, the space between the grid lines is viewed as a grid track, either row or column. And then grid gap, the space between the adjacent grid items. So let me explain this here. You can see this is the first grid row and column. So this is the first grid item. So there is the space between one item to another item. This space is called grid gap. Okay, so these are the basic grid terms that I'm going to use in the upcoming slides. So first let's start with the grid line. So we know what is grid line, right? So it starts where the grid row and column starts. Okay, so the lines separating the rows and columns. So how to use this grid line to customize the element? So that is grid line concept. So this grid line have the following associated properties: grid column start, grid column end, and grid row start and grid row end. So these are the 4 associated properties that is associated with the grid line. So let's see how we can use this 4 property to control the placement of the grid items. So you can see here, what is our focus? Our focus is this grid line property, that is grid column start, grid row start, and row n and column n. So you can see here we have 8 elements here, and then we are going to customize this item 1. So it starts with grid column start with the line number 1, that means this line, and it ends in line number 3, that means 1, 2, 3. So it ends here, right here. So let's take another item here, this one. So let's customize that. Let's say we are going to customize this one. So grid item 3, and we are going to customize the row. Okay, so here you can see the line number for the row starts from here. Row line 1, line 2, line 3, line 4. So if you want this particular element to take all the 3 lines, the remaining 3 lines except the first line, then how can we say that? You have to say it starts from line 2, that is this line, and it goes until line 4. That means it will end here. You can see here the 3 now takes through 2 rows. Okay, so since we have to accommodate this element, automatically the 3rd row or 4th row will get created. Okay, so this is how the grid column start end and row start end will work. So you can control the layout by using the this property. So that is how the grid lines work. So the second property that we are going to see is called grid template property. So grid template property has this associated properties called grid template column and grid template column, and then grid template row, and then general grid template, which is the combination of grid template rows and column. So let's see how this grid template property will help us to customize the element. First, let's take the grid template column, which defines the width of each column. You can also define the width of each column, the child element, and also you can see, you can control how many columns that you want to have in that container. So let's see how it works. So if you take this example in the W3 score, you can see the grid template column. So this is the property that we are going to focus. So you can see it has 4 columns. It has 4 columns. So each column has this, we are defining the width of each column by specifying the pixel value. So first column is going to take 80 pixel, the second column is taking 200 pixel, and the fourth column is taking 30 pixel, and the third column we are setting it as auto. That means whatever space is available, the remaining space will be taken for the third column. Okay, so if we want to, so you can see that the grid template property helps to customize both the width of the columns and also the number of columns. For example, now I want to add one more column here, so that is going to have 100 pixel. So I'm just controlling the number of columns and also the width. So you can see the 5th column has been created based on the given divs. The 5th column has been created and the width is 100 pixel. Okay, so if I want to change this to 300 pixel, you can see now the 4th is taking 300 pixel value. Since the 3rd one is auto, whatever space is available, that space will be taken for this auto element. Okay, so that is how the grid template property works. So that is grid template column. So the same thing for grid template row. Here we can customize the height of each row by using grid template rows property. So let's see how it works. So you can see here we have grid template rows. So here also we can customize it with the the width and number. So you can see here there are 2 rows, and the first row is of 80 pixel and the second row is of 200 pixels. So if I am changing to 800 pixel for the first row, 200 pixel for the second row, you can see how it can change the values. Okay, so simply you can specify the pixel values for based on the order of the rows. So the third one, grid template property. So which is a shorthand version of grid template rows and grid template columns. So you can look at that in the example code here. So you can see instead of specifying grid template rows and columns separately, you can simply use grid template and then the pixel value separated by the separator. Okay, so the order is you have to give the row values first and then separator and then column value. Okay, so column you can also change the number of columns and also the pixel values. So let's see how it works. So here you can see instead of grid template rows and columns, so only one value. So here they have said 150, so we are going to say 300 pixel for the second column, and that is a third column, so for that we said 400 pixel for the fourth column. So sorry, it is taking the rows as the first value, right? So you cannot control the number in grid template row, you can just control the width. So you can see the first one is taking 150 pixel and the second row is taking 300 pixels. So the column is taken auto. So now we can control the column. You can see how it is separated by this separator. So now I am customizing the width of the column 100, and let's create one more column here and let's say that is 400 pixel, because by using that we can control there is a typo error. Okay, so you can see now we have included 4 columns. So maybe you can see 100 pixel, 200 pixel, 300 pixel, and the fourth column is separated like creator with 40 pixel values. Okay, so grid template property is the shorthand version of grid template rows and columns. Okay, so the unit, so far we have used only the pixel values, but there are multiple ways that you can use to control the size. Either you can use pixel value, or you can use the percentage value, or you can use the flex factor unit, FR. Okay, so that directs the browser to allocate the fractional part of the remaining space. Configure a size to hold like auto, whatever space is available, based on that it will be taken automatically. And min max property, it configures a size range greater than or equal to min values, less than or equal to max value. So we can set minimum and max values. So let's see how these units work. So you can see here auto, max content, minimum content, initial values, length, all those stuff. So if you can set auto, so whatever space, so the template column, so you can customize it, how many space available, automatically it will be taken. And then 4, so 4, because there are 4 values, you can control the number of columns, right? So 4 values will be created automatically, 4 columns will be created and the value will be taken automatically. So this is 50 pixel in column 1 and 100 pixel in column 2, and then 10% for each columns. Okay, so max content and max content, so whatever the maximum value available, that will be taken, that is 50 pixel and 100 pixel. Order property. So by using the order, we have seen order property in Flex also. So we can change the order of the placement of the elements by using order property. Okay, so let's see how we can do it. For example, you can see here there are different divs here, and we have changed the order 1, 3, 4, 2. So you can change the order in a way that 4, 3, 2. So you can see this same thing like flex property. So order is the general property that you can use both in flex and grid, okay, to change the placement of the order of the elements. So next we are going to see justify content and align content. So we have seen justify content and align content in Flex also. So if you recall, justify content in Flex is controlling it horizontally. The same thing here. Okay, justify content is all about controlling the placement of the elements horizontally. So it can have these 6 values: start, end, center, space between, space around, space evenly, and stretched. So start will pile all the elements in the left side, and end will put it together in the end of the grid. Center will centralize it. So space between will not care about the left and right edge. Just leaving that, it will try to create this equal space between in the other elements, not in the edge. But the space around will consider the space of the left and right edge, and space evenly will be like it will consider, but it will try to create same space in the edge, also in the center. The space around is different. It will just create some space, but it will try to maintain the same space in between. But space evenly will create the space evenly in all both edges and the elements in between. So let's see how it works in W3 School. So you can see now it is center. So maybe I will try to use space evenly. So you can see here, including the edges, everything has even space. So now I am going to use space around. So you can see more space will be given for the in between elements, and less space will be given for the edges. But when you say space between, it will not care about the edge. This value is padding value, but it will not care about it. Will not leave any space in the edge. So that is space between. Okay, so that is about justify content. The next one, align content. The same properties, but we are going to consider everything vertically. Okay, so everything, all those start, yes, end, center, space evenly, around and between, all those values will be given in the vertical space. Okay, so you can see here it is center. So let's try stretch. So you can see stretch will take the full values, and let's try space between. So as we know, the space between will not care about the edges. Here top and bottom edges. Space around will leave more space in between, less space in the edge. Space evenly will give equal space in all, in both top, bottom and in between. So that is called space evenly. Okay, so that is about aligned content. So the next property that we are going to see is called grid column property. Okay, similarly there is a grid row property. So let's see what is this grid row and column property. So by using this grid column property, either you can specify in which column, this is line number. Okay, so the line number, so as I told you before in the previous slide, the line number always starts with the first line. Okay, so if there are four columns, then there will be 5 lines, and if there are 4 rows, then there will be 5 grid row lines. Okay, so this depicts the line number, starting of the line number. Either you can specify the line number like this, okay, starting, and this is the ending of the line, and you're using the separator. Or what you can do, you can specify the starting of the line number, column, here column line number, and how many, the span, that means how many rows it should get extended. So the number of rows that you wanna get extended. Here span 3 means you want it to expand for 3 columns starting from line 2. Okay, grid column line 2. So this is grid column property, so which is really very useful property that you can see here. So the grid column property. So let's see here, the grid column property is used in the div item 1 and 1 and 3. That means it should start from grid line number 1 and it should end in grid line number 3. 1, 2, 3. So it ends here. So if you want to let's say we're going to do it for one more item. So let's take this 4 for 4, item 4, and now we want to expand it by using span property. So we are going to say start from line 1 but span for 4. So you can see it got span. It starts from line number 1 but it got spanned for extended for 4 columns. So that is how the grid column property works. Either you can specify the starting and ending line, or you can specify the starting line and expand. So the same thing with grid row property. So you can use the grid row property as a value, and starting of the line, end of the line, okay, and then span extension. Okay, so starts from line 1 and then extended for 2 lines in the row. Okay, so you can see that in the picture. So grid row starts from the second line and ends in the 4th line. So let's see it in a demo. So grid row. So let's create one more element. Item 8. So now what we are going to do, we are going to take the grid item 2. So grid item 2 starts from 1 and ends in 1, 2, 3, 4. So let's say it should start from line 1 and ends in line 4, the second item. You can see that here. So that is how grid row property works. So you can mix it together, combine it together as shown in this slide. You can specify both grid row and column together like this for the same line. For example, you can see that here we have the header in this layout and the navigation, main and footer area. So if you want to control this layout, what we can say, the grid row we want to start from row line 1 and ends where the row line. So it just takes one row. Okay, and then column, it takes 3 columns, 1, 2, 3, 2 columns but 3 lines, 1, 2, 3. So we are saying that it should take all the 2 columns, starts with 1 and ends in 3. And navigation, we are saying that it is going to take 2 rows, so 2 rows. And then columns, it is just taking only 1 column, so starts with 1 and ends in 2. Okay, similarly the main, so where it starts, the column starts from 2 and ends in line 3. For the footer area, it takes the last row and there are 2 columns, so the column starts from 1 and ends in 3. Okay, so you can this is the best way to customize the layout. So you can simply specify how many rows you want to take, how many columns you want to take, and then you can combine it like this. So this is simplest way to control the layout of the whole web page. So this grid row and grid column property is going to be very useful. So the next property that we are going to see is grid area. So what is grid area property? It is a shorthand version of grid row start, grid column start, grid row end and column end. So that is the grid line property that we have seen. That is the first property that we have referred, right? The grid lines property. So all these 4 properties can be combined together in this single property, grid area property. So the order should be like this: row start, column start. So this is row start and this is column start and this is row end and this is column end. So the order should be in this way. Or what you can do, you can specify the row start, column start as the second value, and then if you are going to use span, then as usual you can say how many the rows should be expanded to 2 rows and columns should be expanded to 3 columns. Like that you can use. So this is grid area property, and let's see how it works. So you can see here the item 1 has the row starts in 2 and ends the column starts in line column 1, and the row expanded to 2 rows here, 1 2, and the column expand to 1 2 3 columns. Okay, so if you want to change it to 1, and you can say the row and column starts with 1 1, and the row ends in span 2. If you want to keep it like 3, you can say it is 3. Now you can see the row and column starts in 1 for this element, and the row got expanded for 3 rows, and the column got expanded to 3 columns. Okay, so this is called grid area element. So then the next topic that we are going to see is naming grid area. So the grid area can be named like grid area, like you can just name it like this. You can just select an element and you can use the grid area property, and you can just name some elements like this, and then by combining this grid area property with grid template area. Okay, so this grid template area will be referred by this name. Okay, so you can simply say grid template areas and how many headers. So for example, you want the header to take this 5 rows. You can simply say 5 headers. So 5 times, so that it will be taken header. So it can taken for let's look at this in this picture. You can see that grid area X, Y, Z, W, that is the grid area. So that is associated with the grid template area. So you are saying that here X should be in the first column, that means left first column. Okay, and then 4 Y's, that is header area, and then it is center area where you want to place it like this, and this is the footer area, and how many rows you want to, how many columns that you want to have, how many rows. So you can simply visually control it. You can just draw a layout and you can visually control it by combining this grid area and grid template areas property. So it may be confusing when you look at it in this way. Let's look at the demo for this. You can see header, menu, main, right, and footer. These are the elements, and when you want to have this header in all to take all 5 columns, then you can simply specify the header in all 5 column areas, and then you can say the menu should be taken for the first column, and the remaining columns will be taken for, not remaining, the center area will be taken for the main. The 3 columns will be taken for the main element, that is this item 4, and then the last 2 columns will be taken for the item 4, that is right, which is named as right. And then here you are saying that the first column will be taken for menu, which is item 2, and the remaining 5 columns will be taken for footer area, which is item 5. Okay, so for example, if you want to change this to menu, the first 2 columns will be taken for menu in both third row and second row. Then you can say 2 columns will be taken for menu in second and third row. So which is simple way. So if you visualize it, you can simply use this combination of grid area property and grid template area property to control the layout. So for last property that we are going to see is grid gap property. So the grid gap property will be useful to specify the size of the gap between the row. So if you want to control this gap, the margin gap, then you can use grid gap property. So it can have, you can customize the grid row gap separately by using grid row gap property, grid column gap separately by using this grid column gap, or you can just do it together by using grid gap property. So let's look at in demo. So here you can see there is a grid gap property where you are saying that totally 50 pixels for both grid rows and columns. Okay, so if you want to change it to 100, then you can say 100 for rows and columns. So if you want to do it separately, then you can say grid row gap 100 pixel, and then grid column gap 50 pixel. So you can see the rows has 100 pixel value and column has 50 pixel value. So this is how you can customize the row and column gap. So in this section we have explored and practice the demos in W3 School website for all the grid item related properties. Okay, so see you in the next video. Thank you.